Hey dudes and dudettes, it's me, E.H. Ivins, Uncle Herbie, the dad you wish you had, for another episode of, in fact, the dad you wish you had. Today, we're going to talk about bullying. Now, I'm going to share an anecdote of how I handled bullying personally when I was a boy, and I'm particularly going to talk about bullying of children, okay? I'm not going to worry about today talking about bullying of adults. If you haven't figured out how to handle bullies by the time you're an adult, I don't know what to say, but you've got a lot of serious problems. But we're going to talk about primarily bullying of children because this is where you learn, of course, obviously, to deal with bullies in your life and bullying. And this has been a subject that's received a lot of press attention, particularly prior to COVID, because now by shutting up our kids in houses and pretending that we all have cooties and not going near each other, we are not allowing our children to be subjected to bullying, which may be a good thing, but then again, maybe not. However, that's neither here nor there. Now, as I get into the discussion of bullying and how to handle bullies today, that's basically what I'm going to be talking about, is how you should teach your children to handle bullies. Okay, and maybe you can derive a little help yourself from this if in fact you have issues with this as adults. Now, before I go into my own story, as I was about to do, and before I get into the lessons that I want to teach today, I want to make very clear that when giving advice like this, when I'm giving general advice, there are going to be exceptions to the rule. I can only speak to a broad generality of what's going to be true in my mind 9 out of 10 times. But there's always that 10th time and that 10th person where things are different. And I want to concede before I get into what's going to work 9 out of 10 times that there are exceptions, and you have to judge for yourself if you are in fact one of those exceptions. And when I talk about bullying, I'm going to talk about how boys should deal with bullies and how girls should deal with bullies separately. And the reason I'm going to do that is because there is a difference in the two genders and how they're going to, A, what they're going to encounter, and B, how they're going to encounter it, and C, how they're going to handle what they encounter consistent with their own natures. And to pretend that the nature of a boy is different from the nature of a girl is to pretend there's no difference between, day and night. It's little boys and little girls, and I spoke a little bit to this in my last video. If you take a stick and you hand a stick to a bunch of boys, that stick turns into a gun, and they're going to play war, and they're going to chase around the neighborhood going, and that's, if you say nothing, do nothing, don't discourage them, don't helicopter parent, don't get in their way. Little boys are going to take a stick and pretend it's a gun or a sword. It could be a sword. If there are two sticks, they become swords. If they're long sticks, they become cudgels. But in the end, some kind of weaponry will almost naturally result from giving a group of boys sticks and not hovering over them and telling them what they should or should not pretend that they are. Now, if you give that same stick or a couple, 3 sticks to girls, they become something completely different. And I'm not a little girl, so I don't know what they're going to become. But I'll tell you what, having raised girls, I can't think that I had one of my daughters. I don't think either one of my daughters ever picked up a stick and pretended they were anything. I think that really is just a boy thing. But little girls are obviously little girls, and they obviously gravitate towards little girl things. Leave a group of little girls alone, and they're going to have a tea party, or they're going to talk about, and I'm talking about little girls, and that's what we're talking about today as children. They're going to, talk about their dolls. They're going to get into make-believe. They're going to play house. They're going to do a lot of things differently than little boys if, again, you don't hover, if you don't try to encourage them to be different from what they're going to naturally be. And parents today have a tendency to hover like crazy, and I don't think you're going to disagree with me when I say that. Okay, so now let's get into my own story and how I learned to deal with bullying. When I was a little boy, we moved from and let me preface this. I'm Jewish, okay? I was born Jewish. I am Jewish. I'm proud to be Jewish. I'm a Jewish guy, a proud Jewish American. And I was born in Miami Beach, Florida, but I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And in the beginning, I lived when I was saved from we moved to Pittsburgh when I was 5 years old, subsequent to my parents' divorce and my mother's remarriage. And we lived in Squirrel Hill. Squirrel Hill is to this day, a very Jewish part of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a city with neighborhoods. I live today in Phoenix, Arizona, And Phoenix doesn't really have neighborhoods. Phoenix is a great, big, sprawling, frankly, honestly, I wouldn't live here but for my grandson and my eldest daughter, who I want to be close to, particularly my grandson, my first grandchild, who I'm very excited about, and I like to be with him as much as I possibly can, and that is why I live in Phoenix, Arizona. But I would never live here otherwise, because it is a city bereft of neighborhoods. I like neighborhoods. I like the feel of neighborhoods. And I think you all know what I mean when I say that. So anyway, back to Pittsburgh. I grew up and I lived in Squirrel Hill. Now, Squirrel Hill is famous, actually, for the wrong reasons these days. This is the location of the Tree of Life Synagogue, where the huge massacre of Jews took place not too long ago, you'll all recall. The largest massacre in a synagogue that's ever taken place in the United States was the Tree of Life in Squirrel Hill. And as a little boy, that synagogue is located on Wilkins Avenue, and I walked past this Tree of Life many, many times. That Tree of Life is a conservative synagogue. We were Reform, which means we were Reform is to Jews what Unitarians are to Christians, for those of you who are not familiar. We are the loosey-gooseyest form of Judaism in terms of dogma, let's say, and the Tree of Life is conservative. So I didn't attend the Tree of Life, but that's where it's located. And in Squirrel Hill, there are Reform Jews, conservative Jews, Orthodox Jews, but the consistent theme is Jews, Jewish culture, Jewish ways of doing things. Our neighbors were Jewish, on both sides and across the street. Now, from the time I was 5 until I was 9, we lived in Squirrel Hill. At 9 years old, we moved to Mount Lebanon. Now, at 9 years old, this was 1966. I was born in 1957. And in 1966, the Civil Rights Act had just passed, and while it was a great boon for Black Americans, it also helped Jewish Americans and Americans of other minorities, because it opened up areas that were closed to us previously, and Mount Lebanon was one of those areas. Mount Lebanon had been, up until a very short time before we moved in, restricted. Restricted is not a word that comes up today, but in those days it meant no Jews, no Blacks, nobody but Christians. Now, there were Catholics and there were Protestants, and they didn't really like each other, but they already lived in Mount Lebanon, and they were uniformly white. It was a 100% white community, and they weren't too crazy about Jews. Now, why did we move to Mount Lebanon? I don't have the slightest idea. Now, today I'm sure Mount Lebanon is completely open, and everything I'm about to say is not fair for me to say against modern Mount Lebanon, which I'm sure is a very different place. But in those days, it had just come out of being restricted. We moved in, my parents are both gone now. I never talked to them about why we moved to Mount Lebanon. I don't understand why we moved to Mount Lebanon, but we did. And immediately, the bullying began in school. And when kids did, even if you knew me today, I'm obviously Jewish. I'm Jewish in the way I inflect myself. I'm Jewish in the way I express myself. I'm Jewish in the way I address problems, in the way I think. And just to understand that briefly, Jewish people don't see black and white. We see shades of gray. We see much more nuance than the mainstream typically does. So, if someone says that's great or that's terrible, a Jew would say, well, if not, if you look at it this way. That's basically the Jewish way of thinking. Anyway, so we go out to Mount Lebanon, and the anti-Semitism starts right away, because I'm identified as, and for whatever reason, the kids started asking me, what church do you go to? And when I said Temple Emmanuel, that led to questions, and a significant percentage of the kids were anti-Semitic. Now, there are degrees of anti-Semitism, and my parents had taught me not to. They had prepared me that there was going to be anti-Semitism, and they had told me that there was going to be inevitably some bullying going on, and consequently, it wasn't unexpected. It was just shocking, having come from Squirrel Hill, okay, where everybody was Jewish. So who even thought about this anti-Semitism thing? It was just kind of amazing to us. And by the way, there were plenty of good people in Mount Lebanon, and we had plenty of neighbors who were very, very lovely and knew we were Jewish and were totally fine about it. But anyway, there was this one kid who developed into my nemesis, and he was the school bully. And he didn't bully just me, he bullied everybody. His name was Robert. I'm not going to use his last name, because for all I know, he's still alive, and I don't want to start a war with Robert, who's probably still a virulent anti-Semite, if he's alive, because that kind of thing doesn't seem to ever go away, no matter what time brings. But anyway, stupid is as stupid does, and stupid tends to be as permanent as, you know, a grape juice stain on a white shirt. I don't know why, but it just is. So anyway, or I probably should say a blood stain, since it's a blood libel, but that's neither here nor there. So as we go down, Robert became he was everybody's nemesis. He was huge, okay? And I'm a tall man. You know, today I'm 6'3" and I weigh about 230, 235, and I'm a big man. And I was always a tall kid. I was always one of the tallest in my class, but Robert was a freak of nature. Robert was huge. Either that or he had been held back a couple of times. I used to always suspect that because he was such a moron in so many ways. And this kid was very, very aggressive and a very, very bad bully. And he beat up children all the time. But I became, as the sole Jewish kid at Stephen C. Foster Elementary School and later Mellon Junior High School, because we just followed one into the other, he was my nemesis. He was just constantly coming at me. And in the beginning, I tried to be a gentleman about it because my mother had told me not to respond and to lower myself to the same level as the bullies. This turned out to be terrible advice. This does not get rid of bullies. You know, for those of you out there who are raising your children to handle bullies by being stoic or walking away or trying to reason with them or befriend them, none of these things are going to work. I tried them all. I had clever little comebacks. One of the things my mother used to say to me is just tell him that while our ancestors were writing books while his were swinging from trees, as if a anti-Semite is going to be impressed by that particular statement, true or false as it may or may not be. Or she would say, funny, tell him to say, funny why you worship one, because, Jesus was Jewish. But, really, anti-Semitism is a disease of the mind, and like all prejudice and all racism is, and there was no reasoning with a bully this way, and all it did was inflame him, really. And a couple of times we came to shoving, but not to blows. But what it really was verbal bullying all the time. I mean, he called me a kike more times than I can possibly remember, and the only reason I use that word on this podcast is because I'm Jewish, that word to a Jew is like the N-word to a black person. But having said that, I heard it all the time. I heard it almost every day. It was just kike, 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 over and over and over and over. It was incessant. It was unstoppable until one day I had just had enough, and we were in a class. This was in junior high school. It was at Mellon Junior High School, and we were in Earth Sciences class. I'll never forget it as long as I live. It was a formative experience in my life. And I don't know what it was that day. I was 12 years old. It was I think the 7th grade. I was in the 7th grade. Again, a tall kid, but Robert was much, much bigger. I walked into Earth Sciences class. He was in it as well. And as I walked by his desk, he did what he always did and made some comment with the word kike in it. And I don't know what happened, but a switch just flipped in my head. I had just had enough of this. I had enough of being pushed around by this bully. I had enough of backing down. I had enough of trying to reason my way out of it. I had had enough of trying to talk to him. I had had enough of trying to befriend him. And I tried all those things. I'd invited him over the years to my birthdays. I tried to reach out. I tried to kill him with kindness. None of this stuff worked. So as I walked by him, and as the door to the room was in the front of the room, he sat further to the front because that's where the teacher kept the troublemakers, which he was. I walked past him. On a shelf behind him was a terrarium, which those of you who don't know what a terrarium is, it's an empty aquarium that's set up like a desert scape or a landscape, sometimes with animals, sometimes without. It's like a dry aquarium. Anyway, and it's set up inside of an aquarium vessel. I picked it up and I crushed it over his head, ultimately sending him to the hospital with compressed vertebra and knocking out a couple of his teeth. Now, this came as a great big shock to everyone, and I was taken down to the assistant principal's office, obviously, and they were, his parents came to school and they were screaming for my blood. My parents were called into school and yada, 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 and we met in the assistant principal's office, and I must say proudly that my stepfather stood up for me and told the assistant principal that I would not be suspended, otherwise he would bring a civil rights lawsuit, and the whole thing blew over and went away. But here is the punchline to this entire story, which is Robert never bothered me again. In fact, from that day forward, Robert was afraid of me. And every time, how did I know this? Because I could see him ducking out of in the different hallways and doorways when I would be coming down the hall. Bullies, in the end, are always cowards. And Robert, consistent with that, was in fact a coward. And when someone finally stood up to him and hurt him, and I put him in the hospital for over a week, but before he came back to school, and by that point they had, put, I don't know if they put implants or something back to replace his teeth, and he had 2 black eyes, and he just looked terrible, and he was all scratched up from the broken glass and so on. And I was fortunate that I didn't do much worse, let's be honest. I mean, that's a little reactionary what I did, but enough was enough. And the point is, it absolutely put an end to the bullying. In fact, he began later, about a year or so later, he began cautiously sucking up to me, and not only becoming friendly towards me, but becoming a hanger-on, just the opposite. It completely cowed him. And it also had the broader effect, because what I did is I made it clear to him that if he bothered anybody that I knew, which was everybody, I was a very gregarious kid. In fact, I was the president of my class every year, beginning from the 6th grade on. So I was a popular kid, and lots of kids, and I were friends. And I told him if he ever harmed any of my friends, the same thing would happen as if he harmed me. And that was the end of that. Now, let's bring this forward and talk about, obviously, what I'm talking about, which is the only way to handle a bully is to confront him or her. And 9 out of 10 times, the bully's going to be a him. Girls are bullies, but they're bullies in different ways. In fact, let me take that back. That's not true. 9 out of 10 times it's going to be. Boys and girls bully differently. Let's talk about boy bullies first, then we'll talk about girl bullies, because with my 2 daughters, I've dealt with those 2, and I'm going to get to that. Boy bullies, you have to teach your boys to do exactly what I did without hitting their enemies over the head with a terrarium, which is to say, fight back. And when I raised my 2 sons, who are today 40 and 30, almost 30 respectively, and obviously adults and well-adjusted, and alpha males. I raised them to be alpha males. I raised them to be alpha males because life is infinitely easier if you embrace it and grab it and go at it aggressively than if you wait for it to come at you, in my opinion. Now, having said that, they both at different times had instances of bullying, and I gave them the same advice both times. Punch the kid in the nose. Now, and do it without warning, and there's no such thing as a fair fight. Now look, I'm not advocating weapons, obviously, and I'm not advocating putting children in hospitals or anything like that, but the quickest way to deal with the bully is to bloody them, frankly. Bullies are cowards, and a good punch in the nose. Now, of course, my oldest son, John, was being actually bullied by a group of boys at the junior high school he was at, and my advice to him was very, very simple: attack the leader. And then he asked me, he said, well, if I attack the leader, I'm going to get beat up. And I said, yes, you are. You're going to get beat up. But they'll never bother you again, because in the end, all those other people around the leader are just hangers-on. The leader is really the guy who's instigating the bullying. So if you hurt him, they'll find other targets. They're not going to ever attack a kid who fights back. Okay, especially one who does so without warning. So don't give it a speech. Don't challenge him to a fight. There's no such thing as a fair fight. Don't get into a long discussion. Pardon me. That is, believe it or not, the sound of a garbage truck dumping a garbage bin behind me, and I'm just going to allow that to happen for a moment before I. Wow, that was quite the thunk. This is what happens when we deal with home podcasts and not. ABC studios in Los Angeles. Okay, he's almost done. I feel like he's pulling away, and that's the end of him. Okay, that's the end of that. Okay, back to it. So boys, here's what you do. No such thing as a fair fight is where I was, which means there are no rules. You simply smack the kid. If the kid's a lot bigger than you, smack him with a brick. It doesn't really matter. Pick up what's near you and let him have it. Now, you might get beat up, okay, and you might get hurt, but the chances are overwhelming you're not going to get killed. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to get a bloody lip or a black eye or maybe a loose tooth in the worst case scenario. And those of you who are moms watching me and getting appalled by everything that I'm saying, boys have to learn to take their licks. It'd be nice to believe that we live in a world where that isn't true, but that is just the way it is. And the funny part is that much like the best defense is a good offense. In other words, the way to prevent a war is to have a military so strong that nobody in their right mind would ever challenge it. The way to deal with a bully is to make them so sure they're going to get hurt, they're never going to bully you again. You cannot reason with a bully. You know, what is a bully but a budding sociopath and or psychopath? And the quickest way to deal with a sociopath is to hurt them, because the one thing they care about is themselves. And if you can put a hurt on a bully, okay, and with the boy, the best hurt is physical. If you can put a hurt on the boy physically, even if you lose the fight, he will never bother you again. Period. End of story. That's the way to deal with bullies, okay? Unless you want to raise a child who becomes a young man who becomes the subject of bullying his entire life, because we all know that bullying continues, and it continues into your professional life. There will be bullies in your office. They won't hit you, but they'll do everything else but, and you know how damaging they can be as adults. And teaching kids to stand up and be aggressive with a bully right from the beginning puts an end to that. And it creates an aura, an ambiance, an air around your child, later your young man, because I'm still talking about boys here, that he will not be fooled with, and so therefore 99 times out of 100 for the rest of his life, he won't be fooled with, because of the radiation of the attitude that I will not be intimidated. That's the word I'll use. Okay, enough about boys. Let's go talk about girls. Now, I have two daughters. They are 42 and 26 respectively. Yes, big spread. I was married twice and got custody of my children from my first marriage when my first wife ran away with another man. So anyway, and that's neither here nor there, just to give you a little background on how I have daughters with such a huge age disparity. So the 26-year-old daughter and the 30-year-old son are from my second wife. The 40-year-old and 42-year-old are the children are from my first marriage that I raised myself. I was a single parent for about 7 years before I remarried my second wife. Okay, now, so as a daddy, you know, one of the things that a daddy does, you know, is be the place where daughters go to feel safe. I mean, that's one of the huge roles of fathers in a girl's lives. You know, just digressing, one of the big problems with girls who don't have fathers is they tend to become very, very promiscuous as they enter puberty and adulthood. You know, in fact, I've found in my own adult life, subsequent to divorce, when I went back into the dating world, I knew instantly who was raised with a father and who wasn't, simply by how they occurred as women. The more needy the woman, the more likely it is that there was no father present in her life to reinforce to her what a father's primary role is, which is to reinforce to a young woman that she is a strong, proud person, to stand in her own truth and will achieve anything she wants, you know, in our country, our culture, and in her life. And and a mom just can't do that. There just is it's the biological imperative of fathers to do that. And the other job of a father is to make his daughter feel safe. So when my little girls were bullied, starting with elementary school, as all little girls will be by other little girls sooner or later, they would come to me. And my advice to them was not violence. My advice to them, however, was aggression. So, in other words, don't take any lip off of some wise-mouthed little girl. You have to be a lady in every situation but that one. You can let her have it right back. And I taught my daughters how to let them have it right back verbally. Now, I'm not going to get into that now because a lot of it was a little bit coarse. And there's a time and a place. You know, I always raised my kids to understand there's no such thing as a bad word. There's only a wrong time to use a word. Okay, well, that's not true. There are a couple of words that can't be used. We, for example, in our family, well, anyway, neither here nor there. That's not what this is about. Let's stick with bullying. Generally speaking, there are no bad words. There are just wrong times to use them. And so I taught my girls a couple of choice bad words to string into sentences and paragraphs to turn around and let those little girl bullies have it verbally, which for a girl can be just as devastating as the body blows to a boy, okay, physically. So, and it worked. Okay, let me just say that I gave them the magical, and if any of you are interested in what I told my daughters, feel free to, right above my head it says My Other Dad, and there's a 844 number. I think it's 935-0444. I should memorize that thing. But anyway, whatever that number is above my head, text me your questions, and if you ask me specifics about that, I will. But I'm not going to go into that here. But having said that, both of my daughters stood in their truth. They are both powerful women today, by the way. This continued into their adult lives. When I say powerful, I mean they don't get pushed around by men or women either. They have plenty. They both, thank God, have lots of friends. I mean, that's great. But they simply don't suffer fools gladly, and they don't try to suck up or to become accepted by people who are simply not going to accept them because they are in fact bullies, and bullies are going to be around your whole life. And that's going to bring me to the end, just one final overarching theme that I want to make before I end this particular video, which is bullies are going to be a part of your life, your entire life. And here's what you don't do. When your child comes to you about bullying, you do not go to the principal or anyone else at the school, because all you're going to do is ostracize your child. That's going to get out. The bully is going to spread that word, and tattletales don't do well in school. I'm sorry. Do not intervene on behalf of your children with either adult authorities or, God forbid, confront the child yourself. You are to not go near a child for two reasons. One, it's wildly inappropriate for an adult, male or female, to accost verbally, which is of course what you would do, someone else's child. Absolutely, positively don't do that. And B, it disempowers your child to be able to handle their own problems, and they're simply not going to develop the life skills they need. Overall, and this is the wrap-up point, I think bullies do us all a huge favor. Since bullies are part of life, since they may take different forms. Instead, they might be racists, they might be misogynists, they might be homophobic, they might be but those are all bullies. Those are all forms of bullying. People who, when a person attacks another person out of nowhere for no reason other than they don't like how they exist, they are a bully. And regardless of what the reason is for that, it doesn't change the fact that they are a bully, and all bullies are thus dealt with either by pain or ostracism, okay, depending on the situation. And as you get older, obviously, when you raise boys, you don't raise boys to start fistfights with everybody who bullies them growing up, but there is a time and a place even for physical violence, and to pretend that that isn't true is to live on a different planet. I mean, you want, particularly as a man, you want particularly the women around you to feel safe. Just a quick anecdote. After I got divorced from Terry, my second wife, who's a phenomenal human being and who I remain very close friends with, even as we dated, and I don't know if I told you this in an earlier video or not, but Terry ended up marrying a man that I fixed her up with. That's how good our relationship was subsequent to divorce. And we remain close to this day because we made a decision together as a couple that since we were going to know each other the rest of our lives, and our children, we're going to be at every Christmas and every Easter, because Terry's a Christian, not a Jew, and every Hanukkah and all the rest. We're just going to know each other our whole lives. So how do we deal with that? Well, we deal with that by being friends, obviously. We put our past in the past, and we deal with ourselves. And we found, there was a time when we were in love with each other. We found a way to like each other, and we have always made each other laugh, and we have a wonderful relationship. But anyway, Terry, one day, she and I were sitting down, we were talking about dating, and she said to me, after we divorced, I tried to date a lot of men who are more spiritual and more in touch with, themselves than you are. And none of them made me feel safe. And she told me the reason why that is she always knew when she was with me that if another man or anyone else threatened her, that I would, even if it meant losing my own life, defend her, while at the very same time, a lot of these more spiritual men and all this touchy-feely stuff never made her feel safe. She felt that they would try to talk their way out of things. And that all goes back to the day I broke the terrarium over Robert's head. I just simply won't be fooled with, nor will anyone I love ever be fooled with. And that doesn't, how many fights I've had in my life since that time? Is that clear? Zero. I have never had to lay it, but I've threatened it a couple of times. And when I say threaten it, I don't talk about it. I'm going to hit you. I can give someone a look that'll melt them. I'm not going to, well, maybe here, let me try it. I don't know if that worked. Anyway, but for whatever reason, in person, when I give a person a look like that, it tends to just shut them up, to this day. But anyway, to make a long story short, this is the way you want your children to confront the world. Not as victims, but as victors. You want to prepare your children to deal with the world as it is. Not the make-believe, politically correct, mainstream, way that people want to believe life could be, because it'll never be that way. Human beings, we are simply another species of highly evolved primate. And we have a reptilian part of our brain where violence and ugliness comes from that is going to be a part of us forever until it somehow evolves out, if it in fact does that. And unless and until it does, we're going to have to deal with bullies, and teaching your children to deal with them the right way is going to be a key to their happiness. And that's where I'm going to leave it today. Now, one more reminder, don't forget to click the subscribe button. Don't forget to click the notification button. Please share this with your friends. This is going to be episode, I believe, number 11, and the YouTube algorithm won't even pick us up till we're in the 40s. So until then, I have to depend upon you spreading the word that this is a terrific podcast. I hope you think it is. Also above my head, don't forget to text me, my other dad, if you have any questions you'd like me to address for you. I would love to. And if I don't know, by the way, I will tell you I don't know. I am not the world is full of people who declare themselves experts. I don't know what to tell you other than to get input from everybody that you can and make the best decision that you possibly can. And to that end, I hope that this podcast becomes a resource to you. Also, one more thing, I'd like to share with you my book. I'm an author as well, and I wrote a book. It's called The Terrarium. It is available to you on Kindle. My producer will put up a picture if he hasn't already. Please pick up a copy of The Terrarium. You can get it in hardcover or as a Kindle download, and you can even borrow it from the Kindle Lending Library if you are a Prime member for free. It is a wonderful novella, which is a fancy way for saying short novel. It'll just take one afternoon of solid reading and you'll love it. It is a coming-of-age story, and it is set, in fact, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because that's an area I was familiar with, so it was easy for me to write about it, and I think you'll enjoy it. And it deals with the themes of bullying. It deals with coming to terms with a friend who's gay as a very young child, when you first realize what that is and how to deal with it. It deals with racism. It deals with a lot of them. It deals with sexual awakening. It deals with all the things that a young person deals with between the ages of 9 and 13. The story ends on the little boy who I made Jewish's bar mitzvah. It's a very, very interesting story. I think you'll really enjoy it, regardless of whether you're Jewish or not. And I hope you pick up a copy of it. It would be really great. And of course, you would help support me and this show. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much. And until next time, this is me, E.H. Ivins, your Uncle Herbie, saying so long.